boaters on Lake Powell say water levels are lower this year than usual.
A hydrologist stands at a boat ramp at Wahweap Marina on Lake Powell, but the water she's looking at used to be 100 feet higher than where she now stands. Along the canyon walls, a massive white band circles the landscape like a scar. Locals call it the bathtub ring. It stretches for miles, a horizontal stripe of bleached sandstone that marks where the reservoir once stood. That white line is the story of a lake that is slowly disappearing. The hydrologist checks the latest measurement from the Bureau of Reclamation. Lake Powell's elevation is 3,522 feet above sea level. She compares it with historical records. On October 1, 2024, the start of the current water year, the elevation was 3,561 feet. In just 16 months, the lake has dropped 39 feet. But the current number isn't what worries her the most. What keeps her awake at night is another number, 75 feet below where she stands. Elevation 3,447 feet. That level is called minimum power pool. Below that point, the massive turbines inside Glen Canyon Dam can no longer generate electricity. When that happens, a hydroelectric plant that supplies power to 5.8 million people across 7 states shuts down. But the situation gets even more dangerous. Just 20 feet lower sits a far more terrifying threshold. Elevation 3,427 feet. That level is known as dead pool. Below dead pool, water can no longer flow through Glen Canyon Dam. The dam becomes a wall blocking the Colorado River itself. No water would reach Lake Mead downstream. And if Lake Mead stops receiving water, cities like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and San Diego could face a water crisis unlike anything in modern history. Right now, Lake Powell sits 75 feet above minimum power pool, but the lake is dropping at roughly 40 feet every year. At that rate, Lake Powell could reach minimum power pool by late 2027 and dead pool by early 2028. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's not a worst-case model. It's simply the current trajectory based on measured inflow and outflow. Here's the problem most people don't realize. Lake Powell is losing water much faster than it is gaining it. Each year, about 7 million acre-feet of water leaves the reservoir through releases to Lake Mead and evaporation. But the Colorado River and its tributaries bring in only about 4.8 million acre-feet. That creates a deficit of roughly 2.2 million acre-feet every year. That deficit equals about 40 feet of water level lost annually. The mathematics are simple, and the math is brutal. Lake Powell is caught in what scientists call a death spiral, and the deeper problem goes back more than 100 years. In 1922, the United States divided the Colorado River through an agreement known as the Colorado River Compact. 7 states agreed on how to share the river's water. The deal assumed the river produced about 16.5 million acre-feet of water every year. But scientists later discovered something shocking. Those early measurements were taken during the wettest 20-year period in more than 1,200 years. In reality, the long-term average flow of the Colorado River is closer to 13.5 million acre-feet per year. That means the river was over-allocated from the very beginning. For decades, the system survived because of 2 massive reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Together, they could store nearly 50 million acre-feet of water, acting like a giant savings account during droughts. But then the climate began to change. Since the year 2000, the Colorado River Basin has experienced the driest period in at least 1,200 years. Snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, which feeds the river, has declined. Temperatures have risen, and evaporation has increased. In the year 2000, Lake Powell was nearly full. Its elevation reached 3,700 feet, holding about 25 million acre-feet of water. Today, it holds barely 1/3 of that amount, and each drought year pushes the reservoir lower than the last. Even when wet years arrive, the lake never fully recovers. The trend is clear. The system is slowly draining, and evaporation makes the situation even worse. Lake Powell sits in the middle of the desert. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The lake currently covers around 97,000 acres of surface area. Each year, roughly 500,000 acre-feet of water simply evaporates into the atmosphere. That water is permanently lost from the system. When the lake was full, evaporation was a small fraction of its storage. But as the reservoir shrinks, evaporation becomes a larger percentage of the remaining water. This creates a dangerous dangerous feedback loop. Lower water levels lead to greater proportional evaporation. Greater evaporation accelerates the decline, and the lake drops even faster. But Lake Powell's collapse wouldn't stop there. The reservoir is connected directly to Lake Mead, located 277 miles downstream behind Hoover Dam. Lake Mead provides water for tens of millions of people across the American Southwest. Cities like Las Vegas depend on it for about 90% of their water supply. If Lake Powell reaches dead pool and stops releasing water, Lake Mead would receive zero inflow from the Colorado River system. Yet water withdrawals for cities and agriculture would continue. Without incoming water, Lake Mead would begin dropping rapidly, and within about 1 year, the reservoir could approach dangerously low levels. If Lake Mead drops too far, intake tunnels supplying cities could stop functioning. Hydroelectric generation at Hoover Dam would collapse, and massive agricultural regions like California's Imperial Valley, which produces billions of dollars in crops every year, could lose irrigation entirely. The consequences would ripple across the entire economy. Food production would decline, water restrictions would tighten, tourism and construction could collapse in cities dependent on Colorado River water, and property values in major metropolitan areas might plunge as residents realize the water supply is no longer secure. Behind the scenes, water managers across the Southwest are already modeling these scenarios. Some estimates suggest that if current trends continue, severe water restrictions could begin within just a few years. But here's the most troubling part. There is no easy solution. The Bureau of Reclamation cannot force the river to produce more water. The 7 basin states have struggled for years to agree on water cuts large enough to balance the system. Some engineers have proposed building emergency pumping systems to move water around Glen Canyon Dam if the lake reaches dead pool. But the cost could exceed $2 to $3 billion, and construction could take 5 years or more. By the time it's finished, the lake might already be too low. Other scientists have suggested draining Lake Powell entirely and storing all water in Lake Mead to reduce evaporation. But that idea faces enormous political opposition and environmental challenges. For now, negotiations continue, studies continue, and the lake continues to drop. Every year, every month, every day. At the boat ramp in Waweep Marina, the hydrologist looks again at the massive white bathtub ring around the canyon. It's growing wider. Boat ramps are extended farther into the water each year. Marinas are moved again and again to chase the retreating shoreline, and the elevation gauge at Glen Canyon Dam keeps counting downward. 3,522 feet today, 3,482 feet projected by fall 2026, 3,447 feet minimum power pool by late 2027, 3,427 feet dead pool by early 2028. Some infrastructure failures happen suddenly. A bridge collapses, a dam breaks, but others unfold slowly, measured in inches and feet each year, until one day a critical threshold is crossed, and a system designed for a different climate simply stops working. Lake Powell isn't collapsing through a sudden disaster. It's collapsing through mathematics. Water flowing out faster than water flowing in, a deficit that grows every year, and a reservoir that cannot survive when it loses more water than it receives. If Lake Powell fails, the consequences could reshape the entire American Southwest, because some systems have no backup, some infrastructure cannot be replaced quickly, and some civilizations were built in places where survival always depended on water that might not last forever. The question now is no longer whether the lake is dropping. The question is whether anything can stop it before the countdown reaches zero, and the answer may determine the future of 40 million people who depend on the Colorado River. If you found this video informative, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dive documentaries about global crises, hidden environmental stories, and the challenges shaping our future. And until next time, stay curious.